O scientists in all of us, whom do not accept some moral code to be followed from a fallacy in the sky, that is good, because neither do I. The biggest struggle when dealing with the mystic is positioning them of what one thing they believe in. The framework of the human mind applies to all men and women, regardless the positioning within a linguistic system. For whether or not the definition of a word used to describe what you tend to believe in is itself positioned along the axis of faith or mysticism, or along the axis of proof and materialism, it makes no difference from the perspective of a processing mind. One or the other both feed the made-up words into the mind, and the mind is allowed to go about its processes and directives. It is not the words or definitions that are important. It is that one finds themselves able and willing to go forward with their lives. At a fundamental level, this is all a psychological function that allows the emotions to be channeled into directives for the betterment of one's life. Long ago, before our birth and subsequent conditioning, a couple people in a position of power did their very best at making sure the human mind forgot where this special element to their experience rested. And I assure all that this can be verified by a careful study of the writings of man over history. Frankly, if one has spent one's life studying that which is presented, one will find they have not studied the materials that are necessary to see the patterns here presented. Equal and opposite to how I will fail to split the atom, since I have spent my time studying Adam. These priests began externalizing the concept that we know today as God. So long before our modern science perspective existed, all religions misplaced their vision. May we accept chemistry, though? That cold precipitate of truth. Even if just for the material, I believe this chemistry to be an excellent vehicle. And again, I assure all, so did the ancient people. There is a huge difference between believing in chemistry and believing what a corporation tells you that they did with chemistry. And as a fundamental aspect of my process of deduction, I start out with a belief in nothing, and have already crossed all institutions off my list for unconditional belief in, or adherence to, any and all information that is introduced. No institution or group of institutions have earned the trust of my sweet unity. For I keep external gods far from me. One may only find these truths with dedication of time and action towards developing that which was given. The human starts out with fingers and wrists, but needs to practice to become a guitarist. Time, energy, and intention must be placed within the task to reach a modicum of capability. No different than science, the inward search is a discipline, altogether harder to master, since the amount of disinformation out here is an utter disaster. We now also find this true in our present scientific atmosphere. It's all from bad management. Bad management by those whom claim to hold the truth. Essentially, this is all they hold, a claim, nothing more. The Catholic Church tried to control humankind's inner search and their temporal field as well. As we know, science could not persist under this. Free exploration required a separation from the Catholic Church. So science grew its own halls and chambers, becoming a sore on the side of the church and its need for total power. Science is now turning its back on its own freedom, turning their backs like they once did when they left the church, because in so doing, they are turning full circle into the cruel institution that was cause for the original revolution, disassociation from such an abomination as the likes of the Catholic Church. But I ask, do not forget the scientific soldiers that nobly fought this war, the freedom for humankind to freely attempt the inner search, equally important to the majority of the scientists who brought this freedom forth. Just because today these same priests are still at work distorting our understandings of history, and it seems that one forgets the scientists were fighting against corporate autocracy, not against any god or not god. It was against the elitist, tyrannical, temporal control mechanism. The language is different today, but the effect is ever so much the same on the brain. Equally irreverent, if not more so, than the members of the higher church, it is becoming just as difficult to make any statement in this atmosphere created by both science and church. Don't you find it odd? The very institution our forefathers fought against is still allowed operation on this earth. Does one not see? With knowledge of economy and false history, there is only one way for this to be. All states and institutions have been overrun with those whom bow or may be bought by this institution that should not exist in this so-called scientific paradigm of a world. The fact that all recent discoveries or proofs require technology and money outside the reach of everyday people is exactly like the separation created by the church with pope and priest, a separation from, a division between man and their God, already falsely externalized. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to execute such a distorted mental device. For science, we are equating God with proof, and seeing it with your own eyes, as they say, is different than taking someone's word for it. Again, just like the church promoting illiteracy and corrupting what one derived from their abbreviated spin on things. Can one see? What is happening today is much like the Protestant Revolution. Those humans who wish to explore the wonders of science and the dual inner-outer worlds far from the overgrown institutions in which we find little worth, have left the science church. So now we agree to disagree. Fundamentally, this is all that is happening. So, science, please. Those whom continue to support mainstream institutions are no better than the huddled, persistently Catholic masses that refuse to leave the chapel after the Martin Luther debacle, allowing the Pope to continue breathing. These institutions one supports for employment are only the Church's new outer layers, all financed or infiltrated by Jesuit agents. Like a tree, the Church has grown another ring. And its modern form is in holdings and subsidiaries, corporations and companies, but on the surface has not changed. The age-old enemy to science and freedom is still sitting there waving, smiling, and yet the world expects nothing. Imagine what could be possible if we raised up the symbolic scientific body of humanity to a state not unlike a breatharian, to be free of corporate interest, greed, always telling science exactly how to breathe, The scientific body of present humanity is host to a parasite that rations out its sustenance to those most willing to let it devour their free thinking. Then, once fulfilled their duties, placed are these willing scientists into the Merkabah of immortality, driving the egos of all whom dream, just like the priests did long ago with the kings that now rule the houses of the wanderers, published, peer-reviewed, and looking down at anything that moves, away, making paradigm-crushing claims that the world is made of shapes moving around in one's brain. There is no precedence for ownership over my perceptions. Science is highly segregated by category, so much so that the bigger picture rarely comes into view. With the competitive nature of the grant system, researchers will never choose what they want to do. To help humanity would be great, but my family would perish in the process, for no one will pay for this, is the overall view. With no security, no wiggle room, the mind never reaches these wonderful places. No, they stay in the shade, where we find an overall acceptance of the way things are. Unflinching adherence to dogmatic scientific authority. But how and why? As a foundation, science should be prepared. On the forefront of discovery, one is always in danger of being overwritten by an impending discovery. And while new discoveries seem to affect the directions of some researchers in some labs, these discoveries fail to be applied to the psychological structures of the greater scientific body, with its perspective upon society. As in, what it really means to be a human is so far removed from Newton and Descartes. The materialist viewpoint has completely fallen apart. Yet the world persists in ignorance and arrogance, scoffing at those whom wish to be sympathetic to the vibratory soup this earth I call discovering. Could this undying dogmatism stem from some airy promise of scientific immortality? Just like how they tricked the bard and the artist? Could this desire to be on top, so to speak, be the root of this illogical reasoning? We are all distillation organisms, folks. We are naturally, almost mystically so, driven by the concept of rising. Reaching a higher chair, a corner office, the exclusion zone, the leaven of humanity. The church and its tentacles have simply compacted this vision we all suffer into limited actions that behooves their position of all-encompassing overlords of our very sad human condition. Please search yourselves for a vision. Save yourselves. We are all related. Let's start acting like it. Homodoc.